The universe is filled with a vast and invisible sea of energy that constantly surrounds every living creature. For almost all of human history, humanity was entirely blind to this ocean of waves. We relied solely on one narrow sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum that our eyes could perceive, which we have always called visible light. The idea that we could somehow harness invisible waves to communicate across vast oceans and immense continents without any physical connection whatsoever would have seemed like sheer magic or witchcraft to anyone living before the 19th century AD, yet humanity achieved exactly this impossible dream. The invention of the radio was not a sudden miraculous discovery made by one single isolated individual working in a lonely laboratory. Instead, it was a long and incredibly complex chain of brilliant theoretical breakthroughs and painstaking experimental triumphs spanning many decades and involving brilliant minds from all over the world. To truly appreciate the magnitude of this technological achievement, we must first look at how humanity managed to communicate before the radio existed. In ancient times, dating back as far as 1000 BC in regions like Palestine, modern-day Israel, communication over any significant distance was strictly limited to slow physical means. People relied heavily on fast human runners, dedicated riders on horseback, or very simple visual cues like smoke signals and bright signal fires burning on hilltops. A vital message could only travel as fast as one human could physically carry it, or as far as one human eye could see through the atmosphere. This fundamental physical limitation persisted for thousands of years without any significant changes. The first major leap forward did not come until the 19th century AD with the invention of the electrical telegraph. For the first time in history, information could travel faster than a human being, riding along solid copper wires at nearly the speed of light. However, the telegraph system had one massive and unavoidable limitation. It absolutely required a physical, continuous metal wire connecting the sender directly to the receiver. Laying these heavy wires across entire continents and deep under oceans was an incredibly expensive, dangerous, and labor-intensive process. Furthermore, these physical wires could easily be cut by enemies or broken by severe storms, and they were completely useless for communicating with moving targets like ships sailing far out at sea. Humanity desperately needed a way to cut the cord and send messages through the thin air. The long scientific journey toward wireless communication began with the gradual realization that electricity and magnetism were deeply connected phenomena. In 1820 AD, a Danish physicist named Hans Christian Ørsted made a monumental observation during a routine classroom demonstration for his students. He noticed that a simple magnetic compass needle twitched and moved when it was placed near a solid metal wire carrying a strong electric current. This one simple observation proved definitively that electricity and magnetism were not separate, unrelated forces, but rather two distinct aspects of one single unified phenomenon. This stunning discovery sparked a massive frenzy of scientific research in laboratories all across Europe. In 1831 AD, the brilliant self-taught English scientist Michael Faraday took Ørsted's incredible discovery one step further. Faraday reasoned logically that if electricity could create magnetism, then magnetism should also be able to create electricity. Through a series of highly elegant and meticulously designed experiments, he proved exactly that. Faraday also introduced the revolutionary concept of invisible fields of force stretching through empty space, a radical departure from the rigid, purely mechanical views of physics that were widely held at the time. He envisioned these magnetic fields as invisible lines of tension that could push and pull on objects from a distance. While Faraday was an undisputed experimental genius, he completely lacked the formal mathematical training needed to express his brilliant ideas in rigorous equations. This daunting task ultimately fell to James Clerk Maxwell, a Scottish theoretical physicist of immense intellect. In 1864 AD, Maxwell published a comprehensive set of complex mathematical equations that brilliantly synthesized all previous human knowledge of both electricity and magnetism. Maxwell's groundbreaking equations showed that rapidly changing electric and magnetic fields could propagate through empty space as intertwined oscillating waves. When Maxwell sat down and calculated the theoretical speed of these hypothetical electromagnetic waves, the result was roughly 300,000 kilometers per 1 second. This was exactly the known speed of light. With one stroke of pure mathematical genius, Maxwell realized that visible light itself was simply an electromagnetic wave. Maxwell's brilliant equations went even further than explaining light. They explicitly predicted the existence of an entire vast spectrum of electromagnetic waves. With wavelengths both much shorter and much longer than the visible light we can see, this purely theoretical prediction mathematically set the stage for the invention of radio. Sadly, Maxwell died in 1879 AD at the tragically young age of 48. Long before anyone could physically build a machine to prove the existence of these invisible low-frequency waves, the monumental task of physically proving Maxwell's theory fell to a meticulous German physicist named Heinrich Hertz. In 1887 AD, Hertz designed a brilliantly simple experiment in his university laboratory. He built a rudimentary transmitter consisting of an electrical induction coil and a small spark gap. When he activated the powerful coil, a high-voltage spark jumped violently across the gap, creating a sudden massive oscillation of electrical charge. On the exact opposite side of the room, Hertz placed a receiver, which was simply a loop of wire with a tiny gap of its own. When the main transmitter sparked, Hertz closely observed a very faint secondary spark simultaneously jumping across the tiny gap in his receiver loop. There was absolutely no physical connection between the two separate devices. The electrical energy had somehow traveled directly across the room, invisibly. Hertz had successfully generated and detected the first artificial radio waves in human history. He proved beyond any doubt that Maxwell's equations were absolutely correct. However, Hertz was a pure, dedicated academic scientist, not a commercially minded inventor. When asked about the potential practical applications of his incredible discovery, he famously replied that it was of no use whatsoever, calling it just an experiment that proved Maxwell was right. Hertz died tragically in 1894 AD, at the very young age of 36, completely unaware that he had just unleashed a technological revolution that would change the world forever. Following Hertz's successful experiments, eager scientists all around the world began investigating these mysterious Hertzian waves. The primary obstacle to achieving practical communication was the receiver technology. The tiny, faint spark in Hertz's simple wire loop was much too weak to be useful over any distance greater than a few meters. A far more sensitive detector was desperately needed before these waves could carry messages across cities. In 1890 AD, a French physicist named Edouard Branly invented a very clever device called the coherer. It consisted of a small glass tube filled with loosely packed metal filings. Under normal everyday conditions, these metal filings had a very high electrical resistance, preventing any current from flowing through the glass tube. However, when invisible radio waves struck the coherer, the metal filings mysteriously clumped together, or cohered. This suddenly and drastically dropped their electrical resistance, allowing a direct current from a local battery to pass straight through the tube and ring a loud bell or click a standard telegraph sounder. The coherer represented a massive leap forward in receiving sensitivity. In 1894, the prominent British physicist Oliver Lodge publicly demonstrated the coherer to the broader scientific community. He cleverly added a crucial mechanical component called a tapper, which physically struck the glass tube immediately after a signal was received, effectively shaking the metal filings loose and resetting the device so it was ready for the next incoming signal. Lodge also pioneered the absolutely crucial concept of syntony, or electrical tuning, realizing that both transmitters and receivers could be deliberately adjusted to resonate at highly specific frequencies, which perfectly prevented multiple different signals from interfering with one another in the air. Meanwhile, in 1895 AD, the visionary Indian scientist Jagadish Chandra Bose conducted groundbreaking and highly advanced experiments with extremely short radio waves, operating mostly in the 5 mm to 25 mm range. Bose significantly improved the coherer design by replacing the messy, unreliable metal filings with very fine, precise metal contacts. In a famous public demonstration at the town hall in Calcutta, Bose successfully transmitted his invisible microwaves straight through solid walls to ring a bell and detonate a small charge of gunpowder. His incredible work with these millimeter waves was many decades ahead of its time, laying the fundamental groundwork for the advanced microwave technology we use today in everything from modern radar systems to blazing fast 5G cellular networks During that exact same busy year of 1895 AD, a talented Russian physicist named Alexander Stepanovich Popov built a highly sensitive radio receiver by intelligently combining a coherer with a long metal wire extending high into the air. Popov initially used this novel device as an early storm warning system, successfully recording the massive bursts of radio waves emitted by distant, unseen lightning strikes. Popov was one of the very first scientists to correctly realize that an elevated antenna could drastically increase the maximum range at which radio signals could be cleanly detected. Up to this point in history, the generation and detection of radio waves remained largely an academic pursuit, strictly confined to university laboratories and lecture halls. The monumental shift from a mere scientific curiosity to a world-changing commercial technology required the specific vision of a highly driven, practical entrepreneur. Enter Guglielmo Marconi, a young Italian inventor possessing a fierce, unwavering determination to build a workable, profitable wireless telegraphy system. Marconi was certainly not a theoretical physicist, but he was an incredibly resourceful and relentless engineer. In 1895 AD, working tirelessly on his wealthy family's estate in Italy, Marconi began experimenting intensely with Hertzian waves. By systematically improving the existing spark gap transmitter and the coherer receiver, and by crucially adding very large, elevated antennas while connecting his equipment directly to the deep ground, Marconi managed to rapidly increase his transmission range from a few meters to an impressive 2.4 kilometers, successfully sending a clear signal completely over a large local hill. Despite this remarkable early success, the Italian government shockingly showed very little interest in fully funding his work. Undeterred by this rejection, the ambitious 21-year-old Marconi quickly packed up his equipment and relocated to England in 1896 AD. There, he promptly filed for his very first patents and found eager, enthusiastic support from both the British Post Office and the military establishment. By 1899 AD, Marconi had increased his operational range significantly, establishing the very first wireless telegraph link directly across the English Channel. Covering a distance of roughly 50 kilometers, Marconi's ultimate, driving ambition was to somehow conquer the massive Atlantic Ocean. This was an extraordinarily audacious goal at the time. Many leading physicists strongly believed that radio waves, exactly like visible light, traveled only in perfectly straight lines. They argued logically that any radio signal aimed across the ocean would simply shoot straight off into outer space because of the natural curvature of the Earth. Believed the invisible waves would somehow follow the curved contour of the globe. In late 1901 AD, Marconi personally oversaw the construction of a massive, extremely high-powered spark transmitter in Cornwall, England. He then traveled across the ocean to Newfoundland, Canada, with a sensitive receiving set, famously flying his long antenna wire aloft on a large kite to gain maximum altitude in the fierce winter winds. On December 12, 1901 AD, straining intently to listen through the heavy static, Marconi and his loyal assistant clearly heard three distinct clicks. It was the Morse code letter S, successfully transmitted across an astonishing 3,500 kilometers of the vast Atlantic Ocean. This monumental achievement completely stunned the global scientific community and instantly made Marconi a massive worldwide celebrity. It was later definitively discovered that the academic physicists were wrong primarily because they simply did not know about the ionosphere, a thick layer of highly charged particles located high up in the Earth's atmosphere. The powerful radio waves were actively bouncing off the ionosphere and reflecting right back down to Earth, allowing them to easily travel incredibly far over the visual horizon. Wireless telegraphy quickly became an absolutely essential tool for all maritime communication. The profound life-saving value of this new technology was dramatically demonstrated to the entire world during the tragic, horrifying sinking of the Titanic in 1912 AD. The doomed ship's dedicated Marconi wireless operators bravely stayed at their posts as the icy water rose, desperately tapping out distress signals that successfully summoned the rescue ship Carpathia, ultimately saving over 700 lives from the freezing ocean. In the immediate aftermath of this terrible disaster, strict laws were passed mandating continuous wireless watches on all large passenger ships, firmly cementing radio's permanent place in global infrastructure. While Marconi's spark gap technology was truly excellent for sending the simple dots and dashes of Morse code, it had one fatal flaw. It violently produced a harsh, broadband blast of electromagnetic noise that was entirely unsuitable for carrying the subtle, complex nuances of human speech or musical instruments. To transmit clean audio, a completely different approach was required. Instead of jagged, explosive sparks, engineers desperately needed a smooth, continuous wave of a single stable frequency, which could then be subtly altered or modulated to carry the complex sound. A brilliant Canadian inventor named Reginald Fessenden tackled this exact challenge head-on. Fessenden firmly believed that a continuous radio wave could be generated mechanically using a massive, high-speed alternating current generator. He heavily commissioned the General Electric Company to custom-build a massive, incredibly complex machine called an alternator, specifically designed to spin fast enough to produce high radio frequency waves. On Christmas Eve of 1906, Fessenden boldly used his massive new alternator to transmit a signal from Brant Rock, Massachusetts. Wireless operators stationed on ships sailing up and down the Atlantic coast, fully expecting to hear the familiar, harsh buzzing of Morse code, were absolutely astonished to suddenly hear a real human voice speaking directly into their headsets, followed shortly by the beautiful sound of Fessenden himself playing "O Holy Night" on the violin. This remarkable event is widely recognized as the very first true audio-radio broadcast in history. While Fessenden successfully proved that audio transmission was entirely possible, his massive mechanical alternators were much too expensive, delicate, and impractical for widespread commercial use. The true breakthrough that finally made modern radio possible came in the surprisingly delicate form of a small, fragile glass bulb. The dramatic story of this bulb involves a fierce rivalry and a rapid series of brilliant, incremental inventions. The first crucial step was taken in 1904 AD by the clever British engineer John Ambrose Fleming, building heavily on an obscure electrical discovery made by Thomas Edison decades earlier. Fleming successfully invented the vacuum tube diode. This neat device consisted of a specially heated wire filament and a solid metal plate, completely sealed inside a glass vacuum tube. It had the highly unique ability to allow electrical current to flow in only one direction, effectively converting rapidly alternating current radio waves into smooth, direct current. This made the glass diode an exceptionally excellent and reliable detector of radio signals. The absolutely critical leap forward occurred in 1906 AD when an ambitious American inventor named Lee de Forest took Fleming's diode and cleverly added a third element to it. De Forest placed a very fine zigzag wire called a grid directly between the heated filament and the metal plate. He proudly called his new invention the Audion, which we now universally know as the triode vacuum tube. The triode was arguably one of the most deeply important inventions in the entire history of electronics. A tiny, incredibly weak electrical signal applied to the fine grid could instantly control a much larger, powerful flow of current from the filament to the plate. In other words, the triode could actively amplify a signal. This was utterly revolutionary. For the very first time, engineers finally had a practical, reliable way to take a faint, extremely distant radio signal and continuously boost its strength until it was loud enough to clearly drive a large speaker. De Forest was certainly a highly prolific inventor, but he often completely lacked a deep theoretical understanding of how his own creations actually worked. It ultimately took the sheer genius of a young, brilliant American engineering student named Edwin Howard Armstrong to fully unlock the true, staggering potential of the triode. In 1912 AD, while still attending college, Armstrong brilliantly invented the regenerative circuit. Armstrong astutely realized that if he carefully took a portion of the newly amplified signal from the plate of the triode and fed it right back into the grid, the tube would amplify the signal again and again in a rapid loop. This genius feedback loop made the receiver literally 1,000th of times more sensitive than any previous design in existence. Furthermore, Armstrong discovered that if he simply increased the feedback past a certain specific threshold, the tube would begin to spontaneously oscillate, actively generating its own smooth, continuous radio waves. Armstrong had miraculously created a device that was both a phenomenal receiver and an absolutely perfect continuous wave transmitter, all contained in one simple, elegant circuit. During the horrific global conflict of World War I, which raged from 1914 AD to 1918 AD. The military frantically demanded vastly better radio technology to successfully intercept critical high-frequency enemy communications. Armstrong, serving proudly in the United States Army Signal Corps while stationed in France, brilliantly responded by inventing the superheterodyne receiver in 1918 AD. This incredibly complex and incredibly elegant circuit worked by cleverly mixing the incoming high-frequency radio signal with a completely separate, lower frequency generated locally within the radio itself. This mixing process produced an intermediate frequency that was remarkably easier to amplify and securely tune. The superheterodyne principle was so overwhelmingly effective that it firmly remains the absolute basis for almost every television, radar system, cell phone, and radio receiver built to this very day. Following the end of World War I, radio technology rapidly transitioned from a highly specialized tool for maritime and military use directly into a wildly popular consumer product. The 1920s AD saw the explosive, unprecedented growth of an entirely new cultural concept called broadcasting. Instead of simply sending private point-to-point messages from one specific person to another, a single, immensely powerful transmitter could easily broadcast live entertainment and news to 1,000s, and very soon, 1,000,000 south of eager listeners simultaneously. In 1928 AD, a dedicated engineer named Frank Conrad began casually broadcasting music from a rudimentary station located right in his garage in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His wealthy employer, the massive Westinghouse Electric Corporation, clearly saw the immense commercial potential and quickly established station KDKA, which famously broadcast the live returns of the 1920 AD presidential election to a captivated audience. This single event triggered a massive, uncontrollable radio craze across the entire United States and eventually the world. By the mid-1920s AD, the golden age of radio had officially arrived in full force. Large, highly ornate wooden console radios quickly became the absolute centerpiece of the typical family living room. People eagerly tuned in nightly to listen to massive live orchestras, thrilling dramatic serials, hilarious comedy shows, and exciting live sports broadcasts. During the incredibly difficult Great Depression in the 1930s AD, President Franklin D. Roosevelt brilliantly used the radio to speak directly to the American people through his deeply famous fireside chats, providing vital comfort and carefully explaining complex economic policies in a warm, conversational tone. Radio had truly become the first genuine mass electronic medium, possessing a uniquely profound power to deeply unify a vast nation by providing a perfectly shared, simultaneous experience for millions of citizens. Despite its massive, overwhelming popularity, the standard amplitude modulation, commonly known as AM radio, unfortunately suffered from a major technical flaw, because it strictly encoded sound by rapidly varying the overall power level, or amplitude, of the radio wave. It was highly susceptible to ambient electrical interference. Severe lightning storms, sparking power lines, and even poorly shielded automobile engines constantly produced stray radio waves that created terrible, crackling static on AM receivers, frequently ruining the delicate listening experience for everyone. Edwin Armstrong, the undisputed genius who had already invented the regenerative and superheterodyne circuits, was fiercely determined to completely eliminate this annoying static once and for all. After many long years of incredibly intense labor, Armstrong successfully patented a completely new revolutionary method of broadcasting in 1933 AD. Instead of changing the amplitude of the wave, his radical new system kept the power absolutely constant and instead subtly varied the frequency of the wave to encode the rich audio. He proudly called his brilliant invention frequency modulation, or simply FM. FM radio was an absolute revelation to anyone who heard it. It was practically immune to all static, and it offered a vastly wider bandwidth, perfectly allowing for the transmission of high fidelity, concert-quality audio that sounded infinitely superior to standard AM. However, the existing, highly entrenched radio industry, heavily dominated by the powerful Radio Corporation of America under the absolutely ruthless leadership of David Sarnoff, was deeply invested in the established AM infrastructure. Aussier viewed FM not as an improvement, but as a massive, existential threat to its existing highly profitable patents and overall market dominance. The resulting corporate battle over FM radio was exceptionally bitter, protracted, and ugly. RCA shamelessly used its immense lobbying power to successfully persuade the government to completely change the frequency bands officially allocated to FM, cruelly rendering all of Armstrong's early FM stations and consumer receivers completely obsolete overnight. Exhausted physically and financially by decades of relentless legal battles, constant patent disputes, and deliberate corporate sabotage, Armstrong fell deeply into despair and tragically took his own life in 1954 AD. He sadly died before seeing his final great invention achieve the massive universal dominance it truly deserved. While FM eventually triumphed completely, becoming the absolute global standard for high-quality music broadcasting. Another massive, paradigm-shifting technological leap was secretly brewing. The delicate vacuum tubes that powered absolutely all radios were inherently bulky, incredibly fragile, generated excessive heat, and consumed a very large amount of electricity. In 1947, three brilliant scientists working at Bell Laboratories named John Bardeen, Walter Brotzane, and William Shockley successfully invented the transistor. The transistor was a tiny, incredibly efficient solid-state device made of a semiconductor material called germanium and later silicon. It could effortlessly perform the exact same amplification and switching functions as a glowing vacuum tube. But it was merely a fraction of the size, used barely any power at all, and was virtually indestructible under normal use. The invention of the tiny transistor fundamentally changed the basic physical nature of the radio entirely. In 1954 AD, the very first commercial transistor radio, the famous Regency TR-1, was successfully introduced to the eagerly waiting public. It was small enough to slide easily inside a typical shirt pocket and efficiently ran for hours on a single small battery. Radio was suddenly no longer a heavy stationary piece of furniture, strictly confined to the family living room. It instantly became a deeply personal, highly portable device that young people could casually carry with them absolutely anywhere they went. This newfound portability perfectly coincided with the massive cultural rise of rock and roll music in the 1950s AD, allowing eager teenagers to finally listen to their own rebellious music far away from the strict supervision of their parents, heavily fueling a massive global cultural shift. As the decades rapidly progressed, the incredible miniaturization of electronics relentlessly continued at a blistering, unprecedented pace. By the 1970s AD and 1980s AD, entire highly complex radio circuits containing literally 1,000s of microscopic transistors were being precisely etched onto single, tiny chips of pure silicon, universally known as integrated circuits. This phenomenal advancement allowed for even smaller, vastly cheaper, and significantly more reliable receivers to be manufactured by the Ozozo South. During this exciting time, the practical application of radio waves rapidly expanded far beyond traditional commercial broadcasting. Brilliant engineers began boldly utilizing higher and higher frequencies, actively moving deep into the microwave portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. In the 1960s AD, sophisticated artificial satellites were successfully launched into high orbit, acting as massive, unblinking relay stations in the dark sky, using tight beams of microwaves to instantly transmit live television signals and private telephone calls directly across vast oceans and remote continents. In the 1980s AD, the futuristic concept of true cellular telephony finally became a tangible reality. A sprawling city was systematically divided into a precise grid of small geographic zones or cells, each completely served by a low-power radio tower. A mobile telephone could seamlessly and automatically switch its vital radio connection from one tower to the next as the user drove rapidly across town. These highly coveted early cellular phones were, in essence, simply highly sophisticated, incredibly fast two-way portable radios. Today, we are permanently surrounded by an unimaginably dense, completely invisible web of non-stop electromagnetic communication. Every single time you quickly connect a laptop to a Wi-Fi router, wirelessly pair tiny headphones via Bluetooth, precisely check your exact location using GPS, or smoothly stream a high-definition video over a blazing 5G cellular network, you are relying completely on radio waves. Modern digital communication systems heavily use incredibly complex mathematical algorithms to vastly compress data and perfectly modulate the waves. flawlessly transmitting literally 1 billions of precise O south and 1 south every single second. But the fundamental physical principles actively at work are exactly the same as those first, demonstrated by Heinrich Hertz in his quiet laboratory in 1887. The invention of the radio stands proudly as one of the most profoundly important and universally impactful achievements in all of human history. It beautifully represents a highly triumphant, multi-generational effort to deeply understand and practically manipulate the very underlying fabric of the universe itself. From the elegantly complex theoretical equations of James Clerk Maxwell to the dogged, unwavering experimental persistence of Guglielmo Marconi and the wildly brilliant circuit designs of Edwin Howard Armstrong, humanity collectively learned to properly harness the invisible spectrum of energy that surrounds us all. In doing so, we successfully dissolved the ancient isolating barriers of time and distance, permanently weaving the entire globe into a single, perfectly interconnected network of instant communication. The radio did not just change how we talk to each other. It fundamentally and permanently changed what it truly means to be a human living in a vast, interconnected modern world.